Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlawn Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlawn Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Access to Democracy returns, I might say, for the beginning of its 15th year, which is hard to believe. Over 1,500 interviews, and it happens that with us today is our most frequent guest. He wins the Bronze Cup. He's already won 3 other cups. Senator Jim Carlson of Senate District 51. He's been here when it was Senate District 38. Mm-hmm. He was here when we had covered wagons. He's been here since the beginning. So most frequent guest, yes. Jim Carlson, welcome back.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that you were able to step in today because we had a cancellation from someone stuck in Spain. You were supposed to be here in April, so we moved it up a little bit.
And I'm at your total understanding here of not being a overly prepared guest.
Well, you are always prepared. If I ask you for the history of every street and every house in Eagan, you can give it to me chapter and verse. Jim lives on Carlson Lake Lane. His name is Carlson. You might gather from that some connection. I live in a house about a half mile away that was part of the Carlson farm. And this family goes back about as far as the state of Minnesota goes back.
Well, not quite. All of those are embellishments, Alan. My great-grandfather came to the area right around 1910, and that particular plot of land that he lived on is actually where my sister lives today. She can look out of her front window and see some of the remains of his foundation of his first house. But yes, we've been here for quite some time.
For quite a while. And you've been here as a candidate, you've been here as a legislator, you're once again our state senator, and the things we have to talk about. We're going into the 2014 session, the second half of the biennium, whatever they call that. Mm-hmm. What can we look forward to?
Well, this is going to be a shorter year. We don't actually go into session.
You mean less than 365 days?
Oh, yes, far less. There's a fixed number of days for the 2 years.
I thought all years were 365 days.
We're part-time legislature, We're part-time, so whatever. I'm not sure what part-time means anymore, but we go into session on the 25th of February. So we actually can't hear bills and can't take votes until then. And then there's a mandated adjournment, which is called the sine die adjournment, which means it's the biennium, and that adjourns on the third Monday of May. So it'll be a short session, and of course there'll be a lot of pressure to even have it shorter than that. Politically, it's very favorable to try to get done early. One of the things that we don't have to deal with this year is a budget shortfall. This is probably the first time in many years that there hasn't been a budget shortfall to resolve.
Well, we've talked about that before because when Governor Pawlenty left office, we were over $2 billion in the hole as a state, and his philosophy of fixes was don't call it a tax, call it a levy, call it whatever you want, a toll, call it fee, just don't call it a tax, and take from the schools.
Yeah.
And under Governor, our now governor, really who's running for office again this year, I might say, Mark Dayton, we have eliminated the deficit.
Yes, and we actually have, and that's where, in fact, this morning we had a meeting with the Dakota County Commissioners, and I stood up and made that point clear that we have to be careful not to call it a surplus. We have a forecast surplus. That surplus will not be known totally until the 30th of June in 2015, because we have a 2-year budget cycle, and what this is it's predicting by that date that we'll have collected about $826 million more than we expected. Now, that's only since last July that started. So we have to be very careful about assuming or ever saying that there's money in the bank, because there is no money in the bank.
Well, I hope what the legislature does, if in fact there is a surplus, is not do what Jesse Ventura did, which was give it back in total and then end up in the hole.
I think we've learned that lesson. Yes, yeah, that was a sad time, really, because at that time we did have quite a surplus, but we also had a set of taxes that indicated we were not going to ever have that kind of surplus again. So it was a foolish thing to give it back. Right now, we could give it back, let's say, if we had a lot more of that surplus.
But we don't know what next year is going to bring.
Right, yeah. And the 826 is based on the laws in place. So now if it looks in February, the February forecast is what you determine the new budget to be, if we're going to need any budget adjustments. And that will dictate whether we have room in the budget to be able to, for instance, repeal a couple of the taxes that we had instituted before. There are some that there's roughly 3 taxes, but
one very unpopular one is the warehouse tax.
The warehouse services tax. And we got to remember that's the warehouse services. There again, we have a lot of people that misunderstand that. That is just for contract warehousing. It's not a tax on the products in the warehouse, and it's not a tax on the products that a company keeps itself. Now, why do I say that? It's because there are states that tax inventory. We do not. There are states who tax warehousing as business services. South Dakota taxes that. So we have to be careful about saying that this is unique. It's not unique.
But it became a very volatile issue.
Oh yes, yeah, it became but it was somewhat misunderstood too, because there were companies that were saying, I have to build my warehouse in another state because it would be taxed in Minnesota, and that's not correct. Plus, there are some states that actually tax inventory that people have said, I'll move my warehouse there, and semi-finished goods are taxed in those states. So they would have found out that that's not a good thing to do. And by the way, Texas is one of the biggest that has those kinds of taxes on services.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that either.
Yeah.
So if we don't have those issues, what do we have to look forward to in this session? A nice conciliatory session with both parties agreeing on everything and
not on your life. Not on your life.
Singing Kumbaya, no?
No, we have some half-finished work. For instance, the minimum wage has been passed at $9.50 an hour in the House of Representatives. It was passed at $7.25, which is the same as the federal minimum wage, in the Senate. There's a conference committee that has been appointed, and they will come up with whatever type of consensus they can come up with. And the likelihood is it may go to $9.50 before it comes back to the Senate for approval. That will be somewhat contentious. There is a lot of reason to go ahead and raise that minimum wage.
Assuming it's $10 a week, that means that people who work full-time get to earn how much money a year?
Yes, it's pretty low, yes. And, there are some contentions
and then
in
pay
it.
taxes on it?
Mm-hmm.
$400 a week times 50 weeks
and one of the
is
most
$20,000, and they're supposed to support their family on that?
Well, one of the most important elements of it is it takes some people out of poverty, too. It takes them out of, when there's a service that's means tested, even health care that's subsidized or housing that's subsidized, it takes them out of that category. So it's not like it's only the money that's coming into the income part of it, it's the money that the state taxes have to pay for services for people that are under that kind, that, you know, in low income. The poverty level right now, I'm trying to remember the figure on it, but it's, you know, and of course it varies by family size, but it is about the same as what you earn on minimum wage. So that's, and if we raise minimum wage, then that means a lot of people will be dropping, or they'll be going over the poverty level, meaning they'll drop off the poverty level rolls.
Or we have to change things right across the board to accommodate those people. I think it's one of the states out west, I don't know if it's California or Oregon, has something on the books that's going to go to $17 an hour minimum wage.
I hadn't heard that, but
Yeah, I just read that within the last day or so.
the two states that have the highest minimum wage are Washington and Oregon.
Might have been Washington.
And
then.
Washington, D.C. has just passed an $11.50 an hour. And then there's a lot of states that have what they call tip credit, tip penalty, tip credit, and that's where tipped employees are allowed to be paid a lower level. That national level is $2.13 an hour. So, and Minnesota does not have that. So we insist that tipped employees get paid the same minimum wage as the other employees in that business.
I know that was something that was very important to the Restaurant Association,
Yes.
as a matter of fact.
And there's even some, you know, there's some false stories that have been promoted with that. I was at a presentation where the Washington and Oregon were cited as having a 28% unemployment rate on 16 to 21-year-olds, whereas Minnesota has about, I said 28%, we have about an 18%. We're 10 points lower on 16 to 21-year-olds. And they were, the person that was doing the presentation was attributing that to minimum wage, because minimum wage is higher in Washington and Oregon than it is in Minnesota. And if we go up to that level, then our unemployment rate for young kids is going to go up. Well, unfortunately, or let's say fortunately, I didn't have my information right there. I went home and looked into it, and I found there's no correlation. There are low minimum wage states that have high youth unemployment, and there are high wage areas that have low unemployment. So there's no correlation whatsoever. And then you start to think about it a little bit. You know, how do you assess how do you assess unemployment for 16-year-olds? They don't get unemployment. Do they report unemployment? Probably not. You're talking about high school age people. So the whole basis on which that comparison is made is faulty. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that we're going to be looking at. We have an unfinished bill for bullying in schools. That has been passed by the House, and we're going to be taking it up in the Senate. And
Are any new bills going to be introduced in this session?
There'll be lots of new bills, yeah.
I hope one of them has to do with the breeding kennels.
Well, see, that's already introduced. That's, that's
a carryover from last session. Yeah.
See, we're still in the same two-year session. So all the bills that were not killed then are alive now.
Because we are one of 4 states that doesn't have any legislation on these puppy mills.
Right, that's regulation of puppy mills, yeah.
Where animals are kept in just the most inhumane conditions, and I've done a couple of programs on that, and I'll do a couple more if necessary to wake up some of the legislators.
Yeah.
And I know you were a sponsor of that bill.
Yes, I'm one of the sponsors, yes. And we've been looking into that in our office also, talking with different people that either lobby or that this is their issue when they bring it up to the legislature. And we're still trying to identify some puppy mills. So if any of the listeners know of a puppy mill, I want to hear about it, because we do want to make a visit to those places and find out just what the situation
The
is.
Dakota County Historical Society just took 1,200 plus of my interviews over the last 13 years, and they're doing an archive. And they're also doing a cataloging job for research and educational purposes. There are at least 2 programs of recent vintage on puppy mills that we did, so you could start right there.
Okay.
And I can give you some names.
Okay, good, good.
Just-
Well, I have a couple of from you already. Yeah.
Close to my heart.
Yeah. So there's that. Plus, there's, and like I say, the bullying bill for schools that just needs to have action in the Senate. And the bonding bill is the elephant.
The
in
governor
room.
just came up with a $986 million request for bonding. Is
Yes,
that correct?
That's right. Yes, that's
Okay.
for what they call general obligation bonds. Then there's approximately another 450 million that is for highway bonds and for what they call housing finance bonds. Those are funded out of different pockets. Transportation bonds are actually funded from your gas tax and license fees. Those bonds can only be used on transportation. So we generally don't look at those as the same as the general obligation bonds. But you're right, that 946 million
Yeah, that has to do
going to be plus or minus.
with roadways and improving the roadways and the
Some
bridges
roadways,
and things. Yeah.
but the general obligation are primarily buildings and repair, restoration, long-term assets. And I think the biggest one will be university, MnSCU school buildings. So, and that's about 300 million.
Now, you've just been appointed chair of the Legislative Committee on Municipal Government.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Congratulations,
Thank
number
you.
1. Number 2, what does that entail?
It's one of those almost invisible commissions that is appointed to do some oversight of budgets of certain areas of the of state funding, and primarily it's doing oversight and approval of both the the Met Council budget and the Met Council levy that the levy coming from the Met Council is actually coming from non-elected people. So this commission is all elected people, and so we're supposed to also confirm that is an effective budget and the correct amount of
An
levy.
oversight type of thing.
Oversight, yes, yeah. We don't have a lot of teeth, but we have the ability to call in people and hear what their plans are and maybe make recommendations, because their money does come from the legislature.
Okay, and well, there's several other things we can talk about.
Yeah, like the new building.
Pardon?
Like the new Senate building.
Yeah, that's the next thing on my list right here, Senate office building, which has actually been the subject of some litigation, and it's raised the hackles of some people, mostly people who are not in office, who don't want to spend the money for a Senate office building, and that will change if they ever get into office.
Yes,
But
yeah.
we're undergoing tremendous renovation of the Capitol.
Yes,
Some of you, for instance, you have an office in the Capitol.
yes.
You people are going to have to move out because this is a very extensive renovation for a Capitol that's 100 years old and really needs some renovation. So the Senate office building proposal was for what, $62 million to build a Senate office building?
With all the connections, with everything that's included into it, it's about 60 million, 62 million. And there's, excuse me, there's some important points to keep in mind with that. One is it's not approved yet. There still has to be a vote with the House Rules Committee. They have to approve it. If they don't approve it, it dies. If it dies, we have a major problem because the Capitol renovation is ongoing. In fact, in the governor's budget,
Well,
there's
you'll all be
the rest
working out in the parking lot.
practically, yes. Yeah, we already, well, in fact, we'll have to build more parking lots to be able to work in, because the parking lots have been moved that are in the back of the Capitol. So the way this worked was first of all, it was the Capitol renovation that has been put off for years. The Capitol is old. It's 100, there's some parts of it that are 100 years old that are actually important parts that we need to keep up.
That's almost as old as me, and I need
Almost,
renovation.
yes, yeah. Every now and then you need a little bit of a tweak, and
Right.
and now we've gone to needing a major tweak so that we can live another 100 years. Well, that building is not up to code technology-wise. The HVAC is really inadequate. It's always been a problem with leakage. And no one realizes that there are no downspouts on the outside of the Capitol. So all of the stormwater goes down through the walls, and those sluices are deteriorating. The wiring is inadequate. Of course, technology is totally inadequate. And if you visit there often, you realize that it does not meet any of the most recent codes for accessibility for handicapped, and even other accessibility. The stairways are very few. The elevators are old. The lighting is old. Lighting is insufficient, and then the meeting rooms are not large enough to handle the people that come up and want to face us in our meetings. And so we have television viewing out in the hallways, and those places get packed. So we're bursting at the seams with a lot of things that are related to the old Capitol. So then the Historical Society has one little desk up in front, and they are in control of the entire Capitol the historical parts of it, and the art and all of the items that are shown in there. And they need more space. They've asked for more space. The Republican House members want space in the Capitol. The Republican senators want space in the Capitol. So, then the next logical thing was, okay, we have to add more space. Now, we've added more space in the past for the Historical Society that used to be in the Capitol. We added more space for the representatives that used to be in the Capitol. In fact, they were actually meeting in the high school that was behind where the Judiciary Center is now. There's a high school there called Mechanic Arts High School, and the state of Minnesota took it over, and that's where the House members were until they built their building. So we've got that same thing now with the Senate, in that the Capitol space that houses the Senate is getting smaller because of all these renovations, new stairways, new meeting rooms.
So the Senate recognized this. The Senate passed a bill.
It was bipartisan and it was bicameral. There were House members involved, and it was bipartisan. In fact, there were
why
people
does the House have to okay it now?
They asked to okay it. Last year, when this was going through the legislature, it was under discussion between the majority leader in the Senate and the Speaker of the House. The majority leader said, we're putting it in there that the Rules Committee has to approve it. The Speaker of the House said, we want also to be able to approve it. We don't want this to go out of control. Okay, so that was one of the agreements, that the House Rules Committee also has to approve it. Well, right now the House is a little bit skittish about it. There's been some real negative, ridiculous media about it, because the first architectural presentations showed things like reflecting pools and all sorts of other really fancy things. None of those are in the Senate building design. That's not in there. And unfortunately, people are running with that. So there's a lot of negative that's been produced. So what the House has to do now, the Rules Committee in the Senate approved it on Monday. It's now in the hands of the House. If the House Rules Committee, which is run by Paul Thiessen, if they don't approve it, it's dead. That's it. And if they don't approve it, there's space in the State Office building that the Senate will have to take back. There's space in the Capitol that they will have to take over that the House has today.
Because the renovation is going on.
Yes.
It's taking place. I mean, you're not going to be able to stay where you are. I know you're in your office is 111 Capitol, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you that we just learned last week that I office in the same suite as Scott Dibble. We're in the very northeast corner of the Capitol, and we are the only two senators that will not be moving within the Capitol building until the new building is built. So when and if that building is built, that's when we move. And we're the only two senators in the entire Capitol that have that luxury of staying in our offices.
I don't know how you work that out. But,
Yeah, it was favors.
been a lot of publicity about MNsure, costs of medical care. I still believe in single payer. I still believe that if we had Medicare for all, we would have been much
I do
better.
too.
But
Yes.
unfortunately, that's not the way it is. Where are we with medical care at the present time?
Well, MNsure, first of all, has been a disaster of incredible proportions in the software. As far as the plan goes yet, it's still adequate. You know, there are a lot of things to criticize in it, but right now the software that was supposed to be developed on time has been dismal. The development has been
Did
dismal.
Obama's people do it?
No, that was, now we've had, well, you know, I shouldn't say, when we say Obama's people, you know, we're all responsible for the people we hire too.
Well, the
So-
rollout of the Affordable Care Act, which is a well-intentioned act, was a disaster.
Yeah.
And MNsure suffered its own disaster.
We tried to build this bridge over a river and let people cross it before the construction was complete. Some are falling into the river, some don't get across, it's too crowded. All of those things are happening with the plan, and the plan is being carried out by private contractors. Even in Minnesota, that's why the governor wrote a long letter to IBM complaining about the things that have not been addressed. And you know, it's a long letter to go through, but there have been some very serious shortfalls in how the contractor has overseen some of this. So there was a firing of the executive director and replacing with another person, but that's not really going to solve the problem. We still have major
It's been
software
a software
shortfalls.
problem.
Yes.
I
yes.
propose that the legislature hire David Carlson, son of Senator Jim Carlson, who just won a major national award
Thank you
for
him.
some of
Yes.
his software innovation. And I suspect he could take care of it pretty quickly.
Well, he's not one to blow his own horn, but I think you're probably right. He did do that, did win that award, first place here at Thomson Reuters, and it makes me very proud of him. Yes, very proud of his accomplishment there.
As long as we're talking about your family, we might as well mention your daughter, who was just made partner at one of the more prestigious law firms in the country.
Yes, she has been elected partner of Alston and Bird, and that is a law firm out of Georgia, and she works in their LA office. Yes, so this 2014 is a big deal for my kids.
Thank heavens they take after their mother.
Yes,
That's all I can
I
say.
know. Yeah, that's what I always say.
In any event, and we're down to a minute already, which is amazing because I haven't gotten to anything yet on the list, which is not unusual. You're looking forward to going back to this session?
Absolutely. There's a lot of things to do. We're working heavily on it, and you know, I have to say, sitting right here, I have my legislative assistant sitting back here, Mary Salisbury, who is the person that you get on the phone when you call my office. And then I've had this incredible experience of having two mentees this year. One of them is Adam Strami from Egan High School and Jesse Carlson from the School of Environmental Studies. And this is something I had not experienced before, but it is the most incredible experience to be able to speak to young people that are just this engaged and bright.
As we're down to our last 10 seconds, I want to thank them for doing such a good job for Jim, making him look good. And thank you, Jim. Well, we'll talk to you later on in the session.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Alan.